Very simply, it is the collective position of scientists within a particular field implying general agreement, not necessarily unanimous agreement. It's something that emerges once enough data and evidence are compiled that point towards a particular model or conclusion, weighed against any contrary data. Consensus is typically established through scientists convening at conferences, through the publication process, through peer review, or sometimes through surveys. Oftentimes, position papers will be issued to communicate what the scientific consensus is to outsiders of the field, or to the general public. Sometimes, scientific consensus positions will be formalized to the extent that major academic bodies will issue official statements declaring consensus on particular issues. Such has been the case for anthropogenic or man-made climate change, the health and environmental safety of genetically modified organisms, and the theory of evolution. Other times, such consensus is not transparently or accessibly communicated to the public, and it may be difficult for the non-scientist to figure out what the consensus is or how strong it is. So why should we care about scientific consensus? Isn't this just an argument from authority? Well, yes and no. It's not an argument from authority fallacy, in the sense that one is claiming that something is true simply because most scientists believe it. But it is an argument from authority in the sense that the overwhelming evidence that has forced the consensus is the authority. A basic component of science literacy is the concept known as consilience, which is the indication of large bodies of evidence from independent sources that have converged to a particular conclusion or explanatory model. Finding such a convergence of evidence is integral to the process of science and is itself evidence for the reliability of the methods themselves. This doesn't mean there won't be deviations in findings, since scientific experiments and studies are never perfect. However, if the convergence of evidence and thus consensus is robust enough, then the evidence inconsistent with the consensus is not enough to overturn it. Misunderstanding of this concept often leads to science denialism, which is a topic I'll cover in future videos. We must give scientific consensus due respect because scientific consensus represents the collective position of the world's foremost trained experts in a given field. What better alternative do we have for a reliable, consistent metric for evaluating claims? As untrained non-experts, you and I must at least use the consensus position as a jumping-off point in figuring out the best answers to scientific questions. If we discard it as a metric, what alternative do we have available to us?
This is incredibly rare. I don't think people appreciate just how rare scientific consensus is. And the reason it is so rare is that many patterns, again, I'll talk about nature because I'm a natural scientist, many patterns in nature exhibit tremendous variability. So there's a lot of variability among data points when you're conducting a study, and there's often lots of variability among studies. So it is incredibly rare that many studies point to the same conclusion. And so when this happens and it yields a consensus in the scientific community, scientists take it incredibly seriously. Do we question it? Of course, we're always conducting more science to answer more questions and to attempt to test how robust this pattern that we have decided seems to be real is. We're constantly testing it. So is it the Word of God? Absolutely not. But it is very important to take very seriously anything that the scientific community, again, a ton of independent researchers collecting tons of independent pieces of evidence to try to answer questions. When this community says something seems to be real, we should really be taking it seriously as a society. This has zero political drive. There is no hidden agenda. Scientific consensus is not frivolous. It is not handed out willy-nilly. It is a painstaking process to reach. We're talking generations, decades, maybe more than that, of the brightest minds in the world, some of the brightest minds in the world, working toward answers. And then when they come to a consensus, we really need to be thinking about that and implementing the conclusions that those scientists, that discipline has drawn, so that we can guide the progress of our civilization appropriately. This has nothing to do with political affiliation, religion, background, economic status, race, none of that stuff. Science is meant to serve everyone, and when scientific consensus is reached, society as a whole ought to be paying close attention to that. The future of our species depends on it.
They're not authorities on this. That's a fallacious use of appeal to authority. And yet I still have skeptics say, well, Steve, you're appealing to authority and that's fallacious. Well, no, stop saying that, people. You'll look like an idiot when you say that. If you appeal to an actual expert that has evaluated the topic, that has weighed in on the topic, that is not a fallacious appeal to authority. Is it appeal to authority? Yes, but it's called a legitimate appeal to authority.
There's an obvious difference between the two.
There's an obvious difference. Thank you.